Believe it or not, my journey into the world of James Dean began with the trip to Canada, eh? I took a holiday from the race car shop where I was working to drive up the California coast and visit a friend of mine in Victoria, British Columbia. My buddy Ken was a cinematographer for Disney and had taught me a lot about the film business, which is my other day job when I'm not building custom cars. It was August 2003 when I headed back home to San Diego and decided to check off one of the items on my bucket list. As I drove south on Highway 5 through California in my bright red Camaro, obeying the speed limit of course, just like James Dean did, I decided to take a detour and cut across to the 101. The junction of Highway 41 and 46 is midway between Highway 5 and Highway 101, about the center of the Fresno, Bakersfield, and Paso Robles triangle. Basically, if you ever find yourself lost in the middle of nowhere, you are probably here. What makes this junction so significant is that it is a point of pilgrimage for many people the world over. In fact, it may be the most infamous crossroads in the world. This is where James Dean lost his life in an automobile accident on September 30th, 1955. This part of the country has not changed since that day. The road is a bit wider and runs parallel to where the old original highway came over the hill from Blackwell's Corner, but still has no stop sign or stop light. The only marker on the crash site back in 2003 was a steel fence post with nothing to indicate anything had ever happened here. Up the road a bit is the Jack Ranch Cafe. Outside the cafe is a stainless steel sculpture and epitaph commissioned by Japanese real estate mogul Seiichi Onishi in 1977. In 2003, you can see the polish is mostly gone, as well as the S, the 8, and the 1, later to be followed by the infinity emblem. Standing there by the side of the road in such a lonely and desolate place, with people rushing by, oblivious to the historic poignancy of the spot, a thought crossed my mind. Someone should finish the drive that James Dean started all those years ago. And so it began.
I'm from Monterey, California, and I'm here today writing a spread with Via Corsa magazine. It's a car traveler's magazine, and I've always wanted to recreate the James Dean's drive. I've driven by the memorial site hundreds of times, and this was the perfect opportunity, perfect storm, and really excited to be here and kind of take those final steps of such an iconic figure.
James Byron Dean was born February 8, 1931, in Indiana. That's right, Byron. A 5-foot 8-inch tall kid from Indiana with false front teeth and glasses would become the literal poster boy for Hollywood movie stars and a legend across the globe. Everyone has their own reason for being a James Dean fan. Many people love him for his good looks. Some people love him for his rebel persona. Some people like him because he was a thrill seeker with the heart of a racer. Many people just admire his creative, artistic, and passionate spirit. When people ask me what the big deal is, I try to explain that Jimmy came out at a nexus in history and culture. It was a post-World War II world where movies were turning from mostly black and white to color. Jazz was giving way to rock and roll. Countries were rebuilding and prospering. People had more free leisure time, and cars now had automatic transmissions. Jimmy's father had moved the family out to Santa Monica in California. When Jimmy was 9 years old, his mother died from cancer. His father then sent him back to Indiana to live with his aunt and uncle. For many reasons, he must have felt rejected, abandoned, and out of place. James Dean was the first sympathetic rebel. Teenagers were looking for their own identity, just like Jimmy. Jimmy's 3 feature films were almost coming-of-age stories about a young man finding himself and his place in the world and getting out from under someone else's shadow. And all 3 characters were looking for acceptance. There's no question why Jimmy played these roles so well. Rebel Without a Cause came out a few weeks after Jimmy died. I don't think he ever had any idea how much his image would be connected to the iconic red jacket from the movie, which I heard he only wore on the set. I personally like James Dean because of his love for cars, speed, and racing, as well as his interest in music, theater, art, and photography. Before Zoolander created Blue Steel, Jimmy invented the look. I can relate to James Dean in so many ways. From growing up without a parent, my background in stage and screen acting, my music, film, and photography background, and most of all, my love for cars and going fast. Jimmy's good friend Lou Bracker once told me Jimmy would have really liked talking to you. Jimmy's last summer would find him in Marfa, Texas, filming the blockbuster movie Giant with Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson. Today, Marfa is known for the Marfa lights, which appear low in the sky south of town and defy explanation. It is also known for the arts and crafts soul of the town that draws in many artists worldwide. It is like an artist colony with a city council. Back in 1955, a Hollywood film crew moved in to film a story about a likable young poor kid from the country who strikes it rich and becomes an icon. Sound familiar? The locals who lived here back then say he was a nice guy and very friendly. He got along with most of the cast, crew, and locals. He was friends with the rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic, men, women, straight, and gay. I think losing his mother at a young age and growing up feeling like an outsider allowed him to relate to anyone, no matter their background. As Molly Ringwald said in the movie Space Hunter, us loners have to stick together. Professionally, Jimmy was known to be very good friends with anyone, male or female, who could help his career. This is what led to rumors about James Dean being gay, that and his theater background. Anyone who has grown up with any separation anxiety, a creative spirit, and a deep desire to escape a small town for bigger and better things can relate. According to people who knew him best, he always longed to be loved and accepted, which would lead to a lot of stories about his male and female relationships. But when it came to personal sexual preference, Jimmy was not gay. There are lots of people in this world that will take advantage of a young person who has lost their mom or dad, who feel lonely and are looking to be loved or accepted, and when the young person thinks that affection will help their career, it's a bonus. Marfa was an oasis in the middle of a vast desert environment. It has been around since the 1800s, but its boom, no pun intended, came during World War II when the Army Air Base opened up nearby to train pilots. In town, you can still find the old USO building where many dances were held and still acts as a mini community center. When you look around the dance hall, you can just imagine Jimmy attending a dance or meeting here, considering his love for music. I don't know of any photos or proof that he was ever here, but it could have happened. While Liz Taylor stayed in a house during filming, Jimmy stayed at the famous Paisano Hotel. This was, and is, the place to stay in town. With so many buildings disappearing from California to Indiana that are related to James Dean, it is nice to know that you can still book the actual room where Jimmy stayed just a month before he died. Even though I'm not gay, I still felt a strange giddiness being in the room where James Dean slept. The stark reality of the history that happened here hits you in the chest. I imagine it's similar to visiting Graceland. To many Deaners, this is like visiting the Holy Land. About 6 miles west of town, you can find another historic location. Somewhere down the road on the south side was the set of the big house from Giant. This was a temporary facade built for the movie, and it is completely gone. The owners of the property are not Dean fans, and access is non-existent. But, just 2.9 miles past the rest stop on the left, you will cross a bridge just before coming to a corner in the barbed wire fence on the north side of Highway 90. If the Paisano Hotel is like visiting the tomb of Jesus, then this is like visiting Golgotha. In the distance, you can see 2 windmills spread across the landscape, a newer metal structure off in the distance, and an older wooden windmill leaning like the Tower of Pisa, defying the wind, the weather, and the years. This is the actual windmill James Dean climbed up in the movie Giant. The close-up shots were filmed in Hollywood, but the outdoor location shoot was done right here. You can recognize the hill and the cistern in the foreground, and the twin hills way in the background. The sign put up by the new James Dean-loving owners of the property helped to mark the location as well. This is a large working cattle ranch with lots of cows and coyotes, so make sure you get permission from the caretaker of the ranch before you try to jumping the fence. You will find the guardhouse and front gate to the ranch another 20 miles west on Highway 90, but it is worth the trip. The guard at the gate is very nice and friendly and will be happy to let you sign a waiver before entering the property. She told me that the owner is thinking of putting in a small parking lot or museum for the Dean pilgrims that come here. Naturally, I offered my help in making this happen. Back at the windmill site, you can take in all the landscape features, the old cistern, the rebuilt Little Rieta Ranch entrance, and of course, the windmill. This windmill is amazing. It looks like it was once a working windmill that pumped water up from underground and down to fill the cistern, probably to water the cattle. It is located near a dry riverbed and pond. As you get closer to the windmill, you can see it has been repaired hundreds of times, and the only thing holding it up is the pipe going up the middle of the frame. But still, you can touch it. And when you do, you are instantly taken back to 1955 when a young man from Indiana was here making movie history. The fate of the windmill is like debating a car restoration. If you do nothing, it will be gone soon. If you rebuild it, it is not original. As the saying goes, it's only original once. I would love to see it moved into a small climate-controlled building next to the highway and a replica built in its place so you can be close to the original, keep it from disintegrating, and still see what it looked like out on the hill. But time moves on, and so did Jimmy. Back to Hollywood. Back to racing.
Around 5:30 p.m., Jimmy and Rolf left Blackwell's Corner and headed up over the hill to another small town called Shallam. Again, everyone pronounces the name of this town differently, but I choose to use the pronunciation I hear from my buddy Matthew Grant, who not only grew up there, but his grandmother ran the post office a half-mile from the crash site. She also worked with Sieti Onishi, another name I am sure to be pronouncing wrong, and together they got the James Dean Memorial built and installed in its current location. With no traffic cameras and no film crew around, we can only surmise exactly what happened at 5:45 p.m. on Friday, September 30th, 1955, at the intersection of Highway 466 and 41. We know that both James Dean and Donald Turnipseed, the young college kid who hit James Dean, had passed cars just before the accident. We know that the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, but no one travels that slow going cross-country through California's hot Central Valley, especially in September. We also know that Bill Hickman and Sanford Roth, Jimmy's travel companions, got to the crash site about 10 minutes after the wreck. The distance from Blackwell's Corner to Shallam is just about 30 miles. At 60 miles an hour, this should take about 30 minutes. According to Lee Raskin's book, James Dean on the Road to Salinas, Jimmy and his friends left Blackwell's Corner at 5:30 p.m. Jimmy and Rolf crashed in Shallam at 5:45 p.m. Sanford Roth and Bill Hickman arrived 10 minutes later at 5:55 p.m. That means that the station wagon covered 28 miles in 25 minutes, which would make sense if you're driving 60 miles an hour in a new Ford station wagon with a V8. All of this means that if James Dean went from Blackwell's Corner to Shallam in 15 minutes, he had to be going 120 miles an hour. It is simple math and physics. The only way for an object to cover 30 miles in 15 minutes is to travel at 120 miles an hour. And keep in mind that 120 is an average speed. You can't expect a small car with a full tank of gas, 2 adult men, and just over 100 horsepower to travel 120 miles an hour uphill on a winding road. But coming downhill in a straight line, all that weight works in your favor. So if he was driving less than 120 going uphill from Blackwell's, then he had to be going faster than 120 coming downhill into Shallam to average 120 miles an hour. James Dean supposedly told Bruce Kessler at the gas station that he had already gone over 120 miles an hour on the way up from Hollywood. Remember, the top speed for a 1955 Porsche Spyder is nearly 140 miles an hour. So you do the math. Whatever the speed, the end result was still the same. James Dean passed Mr. and Mrs. White in their Pontiac just before the crash. They said they were traveling around 65 miles an hour when the Spyder passed them like they were standing still, or in excess of 85 miles an hour. Donald Turnipseed was driving home from school in his 1950 Ford two-door. As he approached the Y-shaped intersection heading east, he started to turn left across traffic onto Highway 41 North. There is no traffic light or stop sign heading east or west on 466, and Highway 41 just veers off to the left if you are heading east on 466, so you don't need to slow down much to make the turn. Stories differ on Turnipseed's actions. Supposedly, he starts the turn thinking he has plenty of time before the Spyder gets to the intersection. Then he backs out of the turn after he realizes the Spyder is approaching way faster than he thought. Jimmy turns to avoid the Ford, but it is too late. Just missing a direct head-on collision, the Ford hits the driver's side of the Spyder with its left front corner. The impact reportedly flips the Porsche into the air and launches Rolf out of the car. Both land off the road many yards away. The front left wheel of the Ford is smashed nearly all the way up to the firewall. The Ford spins around and slides backwards 39 feet as it continues on its path eastward. The driver's door on the Porsche is completely destroyed, and Jimmy and the steering wheel are both smashed up against the passenger side of the car. His feet were crushed and trapped under the brake and clutch pedals. His arms, legs, neck, and skull have been broken in several places. Jimmy had pieces of broken glass in his face. The Spyder's windshield was plexiglass, and his glasses were reportedly found away from the car, so the only place the glass could have come from was the headlight of the Ford. Since the driver's door of the Porsche and the front corner of the Ford near the headlight took the brunt of the impact, then it is safe to assume that the last thing Jimmy saw was the headlight of the Ford hitting him in the face at over 100 miles an hour. Again, look at the height of the driver's head while sitting in the Spyder, and the height of the front headlight on a 1950s Ford. So you gotta ask yourself one question. How fast does a 1,300-pound aluminum car need to be going to create enough force to smash the front suspension all the way up to the firewall on a 3,200-pound car made from heavy Detroit steel? When a car covers 30 miles in 15 minutes, which in simple math is an average speed of 120 miles an hour, I gotta believe he was doing anywhere from 85 to 120 miles an hour. Believe what you want, but go out and try and smash the front fender, crossmember, and suspension of a 1950 Ford. I rest my case.
My name is Crystal, and I'm from Newport Beach, California, and I have been a James Dean fan since I was 13, 14 years old. And I did attend his 30th anniversary festival of his passing at Hollywood, the Egyptian Theater, and I was very lucky because some of the actors from Rebel Without a Cause were there with us in the audience. So it was kind of surreal, but they had a really great festival with 2 of his movies, and it was just a great time. So I thought, why not do something special for the 60th? And I got a hold of the James Dean fan club here in Hollywood, and I wanted to experience with other people who are fans of his, the experience of being together and taking a road trip, the same trip that he took that day. And I really thought that it would be something special for me, like almost a pilgrimage to do this as a fan of James Dean. And I'm here with my family. My daughter, who is now 18, when I did the festival when I was 14, so we're taking the road trip with her, my brother, and my mother. And so the experience, I hope, is going to be very special, not just for me, but for my family too.
After many weeks of studying all the available photos, evidence, eyewitness testimony, and talking to people who grew up in Chelam in the 50s and 60s, I have come to my own forensic analysis of exactly what happened when the Porsche Spyder and the Ford two-door collided. Part of studying evidence and photos is not just looking at what you can see, but what you don't see. When I look at the photos of the crashed Porsche on the side of the road, the first thing that I don't see are skid marks across the pavement or tire marks across the dirt and grass. If the Spyder had spun around like some people have reported, there would have been skid marks across the pavement and tire marks across the dirt to where the 550 stopped. There is only one squiggly skid mark on the pavement where the Porsche may have collided with the Ford. The witnesses driving behind Jimmy and Rolf said they saw something or someone fly out of the Porsche into the air when the cars collided. They said they saw the Porsche spin to the right and roll over and over. When you look at the photos of the Porsche, you can see that the side of the car is not just crushed inward like hitting a telephone pole, but smashed inward and upward like a parallelogram. This is clear evidence that the car was initially impacted from the driver's side, but then flipped upward, launching Rolf out of the car. You also see in the photos of the Ford that the collision was not a glancing blow. If it was, The front wheel would have been peeled off, not forced back and inward toward the firewall. To push the wheel of the Ford inward, the energy from the impact had to be coming at the Ford from an angle. A glancing blow would have just peeled the skin off the Porsche instead of pushing all the metal into the car and the steering wheel into the passenger side of the car. Another fact that the photos show is that the rim of the Ford did not leave a gouge in the pavement like many people, myself included, have believed for 65 years. After studying the photos and zooming in, you can see that the gash in the pavement is actually from the inner fender or firewall body panel, not the wheel. It still indicates the same thing. The Ford spun around after the impact and then rolled backwards in an arc back towards the eastbound lane, proving that the crash happened in the westbound lane. The most misunderstood evidence of the crash photos is the skid marks, supposedly left by the Ford. It has been reported since the accident that the Ford skidded, rolled, and then skidded again. After many long hours studying all the photos, evidence, and witness testimony, I can tell you with 99.9% certainty that this is simply not true. I could be wrong, but please follow along with me. Witnesses behind the Ford and behind the Porsche both said that neither car hit the brakes or skidded. Supposedly, the Ford slowed down for the turn, but no brake lights were seen and no skidding was heard. 15-year-old Don Dooley was a passenger with his uncle in a truck about 50 yards behind the Ford. He testified that he did not see anything or hear skidding. He only saw the cars coming together. Mr. and Mrs. White were behind Jimmy when the accident happened. They were admittedly going around 65 to 68 miles per hour, and they said the Porsche passed them like they were standing still. They said they looked at their speedometer right away because the car passed them so fast. Mr. White said the silver Porsche had to be going at least 85 miles an hour. This was just about a mile before the crash on the long straightaway approaching the 41 junction. Mr. and Mrs. White said they never saw any brake lights on the Porsche either. All the witnesses from both directions said that the Ford was beginning its turn onto Highway 41 ahead of the turn. In fact, the Ford started turning so early that Mr. White had time to tell his wife, "Watch this." She lifted her head up in time to see the collision. Mr. White also said that Dean's car did not even slow down. All the witnesses said that the Ford started to make the turn and then turned back towards its own lane. The fact of the matter is, neither car ever hit their brakes. So what about the skid marks everyone claims to be from the Ford? Here is what I believe happened. The skid marks are from an earlier accident. Crashes occur at this junction many times a year, even to this day. If you study the photos, you can see that the skid marks begin, or end, in the westbound lane. They continue in one direction in a curved line with no indication that the car that left these marks ever changed direction. The Ford could not have left these marks because A, they don't match the testimony that the Ford started the turn and then turned back. B, the angle of impact inferred by these skid marks could not have produced the force it would take to push the front wheel of the Ford into the firewall. In other words, it would have been a glancing blow and the damage to the two cars would have been much different. Basically, the angle is wrong. C, the second set of skid marks is too close to where the Ford stopped to have been made by the Ford. D, if you look close, there is a third set of skid marks in line past where the Ford stopped. Bottom line is, there is just no way that the Ford could have made these skid marks. The evidence and witness testimony do not support in any way that these skid marks were from James Dean's accident on September 30th. To get an idea what might have caused these skid marks, you have to look at the surrounding evidence. The obvious skid marks from a dually truck can be seen easily. One thing you notice about these skid marks is that they appear to be curved like the shadow of a telephone line. This indicates that the highway undulates up and down. You can see this in other photos of the old highway. In fact, a friend of mine who grew up in Shalem told me that there was a dip just before the junction in the westbound lane heading west. In one photo, you can see dirt settled on the side of the road, indicating a low spot. If both roads are crowned for drainage, then there would be a low spot in the corner where the two roads meet. Even a 2 or 3 inch dip in the road would be significant in a 3-foot tall car at over 80 miles an hour. Not to mention that 550s are notorious for spinning on a track or at speed because of the light weight of the car and the engine being near the back. But if you look close, you notice a set of skid marks in the eastbound lane. They look like they are starting to turn onto 41, but then suddenly dart off to the right in a very acute angle. The only way for a car to make skid marks like this is if it is hit from the side or at an angle. Funny thing is, the skid marks that everyone says are from the Ford lead right up to where the eastbound skid marks suddenly make a sharp right turn. Actually, they line up perfectly, and there are no other skid marks to explain the abrupt, almost 90-degree change of direction they make. Here's a visual example to help you understand. A car is stopped at the stop sign heading southwest. Another car is caught off guard by the stopped car and tries to go around, hitting its brakes near the stop sign in the opposite lane. The off and on skid marks are curving towards the westbound Highway 466. It impacts an oncoming car making the turn onto Highway 41. The skid marks are now explained. Bob's your uncle, and Han shot first. So here's the accident sequence as I see it. James Dean and Donald Turnipseed approach the junction after both cars have just passed other vehicles. Turnipseed was a car guy, as displayed by his modified 1950 Ford with two-tone paint, a new hood from a 1951 Ford, passing cars on the highway at high speed, and supposedly he replaced his stock intake manifold with a new performance manifold. As a hot rodder, Donald would have taken the turn north onto Highway 41 at the straightest angle possible. With a high center of gravity, the Ford would get lots of body roll if he turned late and made an arcing turn, as suggested by the skid marks I just spoke about. So Donald did what James Dean would do, or what I would do. He checked for oncoming traffic and started to make the turn onto 41 early so he could hit the apex, as they say in racing, and make the turn as fast as possible without rolling his car. Donald Turnipseed either did not see the Porsche or he thought it was farther away than it was. That is easy to do with a 3-foot tall car. I'm sure he certainly did not expect the Porsche to be traveling as fast as it was. When Donald sees the Porsche rapidly approaching, he turns back towards his own lane. This gives the correct angle and force of impact to explain the damage to both cars. In a reflex reaction, James Dean jerks the wheel to the right away from oncoming traffic, and the Spider spins sideways. The two cars impact each other in a near T-bone collision. The Porsche Spider flips into the air, launching Rolf out of the car. The impact of the collision pushes the bumper, frame, and suspension downward and into the firewall of the Ford and pops off the front fender. The Spider flips over and spins in the air. The energy from the impact causes the rear of the Ford to lift off the ground and spin counterclockwise as it continues eastward down the road. The Porsche lands off the side of the road near the stop sign close to a telephone pole. The Ford lands backwards and then rolls in an arc back towards the eastbound lane. It all happens in an instant.
As I look at all the evidence and my own personal experience, I have taken a second thought about Donald Turnipseed. Yes, I think he was speeding, but that is anything over 55 miles an hour. Yes, he had a two-tone paint job and supposedly new racing intake manifold on his car, which would mean he was a hot rodder. Yes, he was probably in a hurry to get home after a week at school. I'm sure he was not expecting to see a 2-foot tall silver race car approaching him on a 2-lane highway at over 100 miles an hour. So he misjudged the closing speed of the two cars and their inability to occupy the same space and time in the universe. But Jimmy was at fault also. He was speeding. He was not wearing a seatbelt, but I don't think that would make a difference in this case. He was probably in a hurry to get to Paso Robles to meet his friends for dinner. And he just made a public service announcement about not driving fast on the street because you don't know what the other guy is going to do. You always have to be on the alert and, as they say, leave yourself an out. It is what Doctor Who calls a fixed point in time. It is one of the iconic points in mankind. It was and will always be meant to be. You cannot change what happened, even if you wanted to. As much as we would love to go back and change history, it would probably destroy the fabric of space and time. So we are left with what might have been. Also, the story that James Dean said he's got to see us just before the crash is totally bogus. The only person who would have heard him say that was Rolf. James Dean's friend and racing buddy Lou Bracker told me that Rolf did not speak any English. So Rolf's English was bad at best, and he had said many times that he did not remember anything just before or after the crash. I think you can understand now why James Dean fans all around the world, myself included, are so fascinated by this event.